If you're able to connect with the need of your customer better, it can define the success or a failure of your product offering or your solution. Same products but differently positioned probably can create wonders. The most important trait which I would say is the flexibility and adaptability, getting out of your comfort zone, which is very essential. So when he was talking about eBay, right, in 99, and these were all jargons to me, but what converted me was the passion in the person, the way he was talking about the business.
I'm curious about understanding how enterprise level marketing works.
So a person who's done B2C will always find B2B boring.
Hey there, welcome to Marketing Mavericks with Indiefolio. Today we have Rahul Sethi from CAMS. He has an incredible career spanning over 3 decades. He unpacks his entire journey from working with an internet startup in the 1999 to shifting from B2B to B2C. A lot of learning insights for young marketers. Thanks a lot for your time and welcome to the podcast, Rahul.
Hi Karan, good to be here.
So, I think our podcast has been, I think, a couple of weeks or months into the making. So I'm glad that you finally took out some time for the conversation and joined me, I think, on a Thursday night. There's a lot, I'd love to talk to you about from the various things you've done, in your entire journey. And I think a lot of young marketers can learn a lot from understanding how to really build a career into a new paradigm or a new category which has been building, which you've done. So, but before all of that, right, let me take you back to, I believe, DU, where you were learning chemistry, right? How is it that, you picked that as you know, a place to kind of study further and then decided to actually do marketing?
So I think life, at our times were very different, right? When we were studying. So this now you're going, taking me back 30 years in my life. I'm talking about early 1990s, and we had very few choices. So chemistry happened to be, now it is no longer. In fact, it used to be my favorite subject, and that triggered me to pick up, do my bachelor's in chemistry. And after spending about 3 years, I realized maybe it was a mistake, and then I switched. Rather than pursuing it further, doing masters, I switched to do a business MBA, and that got me into a corporate and business field. So yeah, and I think there were limited options during our time. Today, if you look at kids, they have so many things to talk about and so many niche areas they need to work on. So it's a different world now, right? And at our time, it was very different. In fact, my time it was very different.
Definitely different, but I think uh, the options and the choices actually now make people feel much more confused about what they want to do. When things become so easy that abhi kuch bhi pad sakte ho, kuch bhi kar sakte ho, people kind of get stuck, right? It's like when you open like a Netflix and there are so many options, you just don't know what to watch. That's what that paradox of choice does to you. And I wanted to ask you, there are people probably who did engineering, who did the law, who did various things right now, and after really digging deeper into it, they don't enjoy it anymore. They don't feel they want to build a strong career, but they're very apprehensive or unsure कि यार next क्या करे. What's your suggestion to folks like that? And if I'm stuck in that zone, what should I do next?
I think if you look at the world today, it's so very dynamic with so many new inventions. With AI, things are changing. Job security now I feel is actually thing of a past. So I think the most important trait which I would say would come very handy is the flexibility and adaptability,
Mm.
right? Which I somehow feel getting out of your comfort zone, which is very essential. So if you look at my career graph as well, right? So I have obviously switched companies, I have switched industries as well. And I have worked for companies where people started in that company and retired from that company, and not it's not about one of my companies in my career, one of the organizations, but at least I can think of, in fact, last three organizations of mine, right, current one and the previous two, I have worked with colleagues who started there and they were on the verge of retiring, so they've spent like 30, 35 years in their career,
Right.
and some of them were really perplexed, and they felt insecure when I was moving on, right, to a new company, and thinking very insecure. So I think those things now basically will hold you back in your career,
Mm.
right, whatever field you choose. As you mentioned, today there are so many options,
Right.
right? So there are so many options in Netflix. You took a metaphor of Netflix. So Netflix has, you want to look at a particular genre of movies, you'll find so many of them,
Right.
but you have a flexibility to switch off and move to a next one if you don't like it, right?
Right.
There's no compulsion that you have to finish the movie and then only you can move on to the next one. Same goes for your career, I would say, right? You Because there are so micro fields today available, if
Mm.
somehow you find yourself not fit or something you're not enjoying, I think it's advisable that you need to quit that, move on. There are so many options available. As long as you have the intent, you are willing to learn,
Mm.
and you're willing to put in hard work, I think there are enough opportunities for anyone, everyone in any career
Right.
which anyone wants to pursue.
I want to talk about your eBay story, right? Like, I was very curious in 1999, joining an internet company must be scary because it was something, people mota mota, spoke about ki kuch hai, not everybody knew about it. We were really trying to, I think, do the same thing, but with an internet first mindset, right?
Yes.
Essentially selling stuff, but through an online medium. And I feel a lot of marketers today who are wanting to, let's join an AI company, will see themselves in those shoes. The
Hmm.
apprehension is that चलो internet है नया है, strategies and playbooks are brand new. I wonder, how did you get confident that you actually know this stuff, right? Because today everybody's like, I want an AI expert to join my marketing company. I've often heard marketing leaders tell me, "Do you have some young chap about who knows AI very well?" And when I go and ask these young chaps and my friends and my juniors, they're also pretty clueless. They ask me, saying, "Arey, what should I do? How do I go about understanding how do I grow as an AI marketer?" So maybe I can draw some parallels based on your experience. And how did you really understand internet and join an internet company when I think it was so brand new?
Yeah. No, I think so. Understanding internet at that point was totally out of question. I did not understand. So the only thing I had about maybe I had an email ID, right? So we had email IDs on Hotmail, Yahoo, Excite. Those were some of
Right.
the mobile mail service providers,
Right.
email service providers. And this is we're talking about pre-Google, right? Even Amazon was not known in India,
Mm.
and what excited me, so I'll again take you back 25 years, and incidentally, my first company, we are having a reunion in a couple of months, silver jubilee reunion,
Ah,
of bazi.com. So this is so I at that point of time also had an option to join one of the most prominent automobile players. I had done my summers with that organization, and it was good. We worked in the factory, in the assembly line environment, and I was part of the corporate sales team doing some project there. So I could very well imagine the kind of job, once I had an offer, what kind of job would it be, going out meeting corporates, trying to understand their sales requirement, framing their sales policies, trying to influence our brand of products to be bought for their senior execs. So similar, kind of
mhm.
profile which I had. And this particular organization, which is which was my first job, I happened to uh, connect with the founder, one of the founders, through a common contact.
Mm.
This friend of mine also finished his MBA in the same year, and he got the offer for Chandigarh, right? So they were also looking at putting up an office in Chandigarh. So he got the placement for Chandigarh, and they were looking for people in Delhi. I was in Delhi that time.
Mm.
So I was keen. I said, okay, I'll meet him. And so the founder called me in a hotel lobby, right? There was no office, right? He called me in the hotel lobby. So I met him in one of the hotels in Delhi. in the lobby. And there was no mobile phones. It was difficult. Today it's very easy. You can WhatsApp. You can say, okay, I'm here. Where are you sitting? And all those things. So I could see one young guy sitting in the lobby. So I was not very clear whether he's the same person. I went to him, introduced myself, and then we started talking. And this is when he was talking about eBay, right? In '99, market online marketplace and whatnot, and these were all jargons to me.
Mm-hmm.
But what converted me was the passion, right? The passion in the person, the way he was talking about the business and what he wanted to do. There were two founders, both of them moving out from US to India and wanting to do something big. And startup was there was no phenomena called startup, right? And he never used a word called startup. He said we are trying to put up a company, and this is what we want to create, and we're looking for people who can start building up. And experience is not needed. We're looking for freshers, and you learn on the job, all those things. So that is something which excited me, right? So I've been a risk taker, inherent risk taker, right, throughout my life, and I think it's paid off,
Right.
right? So I always want to move out of comfort zone, try new things. So that has worked. So
Mm.
that is what triggered,
Sure.
right, me to pick up this option,
Mm.
right, internet company versus something else. And this was a sales, again, this was more of a business development job,
Right.
and creating categories and trying to build supply for certain categories. So, and it was evolving. So he said jobs will change, we'll be a small team and all those things. So we started from Delhi, and it was a good experience for me. 6 years with the companies from the very beginning, right?
Mm.
We and till we created the entity, we sold off to eBay, then stayed with eBay for a couple of years. So it was the entire life cycle of an organization, which
Fantastic.
gave me a very good ground, in terms of my career. Gave me very clear aspects of
Mm.
various functions, right? Because as a startup, it's a very flat organization. We were working directly with the founders,
Right.
and so it was a very different experience, and I think that's the most cherished experience in my career so far.
You know,
Gave me a lot of learning.
100%. I think being part of such a fantastic internet origin story, I think, or a success story,
And it was, believe me, it was not a straight line,
yeah,
right? It was ups and downs, even in startups, right? We started off, we had some fund, some money, then there was a dot-com burst,
must.
right? There was a dot-com burst. There were a lot of companies which came in, and then there was a dot-com burst. I was talking about that Chandigarh office, we had to shut it down. The person
Mm.
who referred me, probably, I had to move out.
Oh
We
no.
shut down that office, right? So that time they were opening office in Chandigarh, Jaipur, whatnot. So then we consolidated, right? After
Mm.
maybe a year.
Mm.
So first
Mm.
year was all merry, right? Parties, startups, young people, hiring from colleges, everything. But after that, we had to shut down because we had to conserve cash, and it was ups and downs, and we
Mm.
had to learn. As we were building it, there were a lot of pivots that the company had to do at that time. And hats off to the founders, and the senior leadership, the way we steered and created value for everyone, all the stakeholders. The
Fantastic.
and the learning was immense, right? You have to be really fortunate to be there at the right time, at the right place, to be able to get an opportunity like this where you become a part of a success story of a startup, and one of the early startups in the
Correct.
digital age in India.
I want to now talk about what you're doing at your organization, right? When I often, as a young marketer, look at marketing, what's been spoken about is a lot about advertisements, celebrities, all the sexy things around marketing. Um, and when I look at a role like yours, where in a company, I'm assuming you're doing really large deal with a very small pocket of clients, right? Often people must be thinking, "Yeah, it's a sales driven organization. Hey, how does marketing really help here in the first place?" And of course, you are in a different city today because your customers are there. So obviously, marketing is critical. Can you unpack how in enterprise deals, marketing actually influences a sale?
Yeah. So I think marketing, as you rightly pointed out, marketing starts from customer, right? Understanding your market,
Mm.
right? So there are broadly, and this is true for any kind of business, right? Whether you are a B2B, B2C, C2C, any business, right? Basically, there are three M's of marketing, right? Three M's of marketing. M number one is the market, right? Is your TG. Who are you trying to address? Who are you trying to talk to, right? And you are never in a position to know your customer 100% because customers will also keep evolving, right? So the more and more you're able to understand your customers, their needs, and more importantly latent needs which are
Mm,
not very evident,
mm,
right, the better you'll be able to service them,
mm,
right? So it starts with the first M, which is the market, how well you're able to anticipate, understand the needs. And there are multiple ways, right? So marketing, I think that's one key role for marketing to play, in an organization, is to define your target audience.
mm,
And that will keep changing, that will keep evolving as the organization matures, you launch new products, your market will evolve, the environment changes, some new competition comes in, some new technology comes in, your customer set will keep changing, right? It will keep evolving, and customer set will also keep changing. So that is one starting point, right, for marketing, or for that matter for any organization, right?
mm,
Whether it's a product company or a sales company, unless you understand the require your customer, first you lock down on your customer, then you start understanding their needs and requirements to be
mm,
able to create products and offerings and solutions for them,
mm,
right? So that becomes your number one job as a marketer,
mhm,
right? And you can visualize this in any format, as I said, whether a B2B, right, or a B2C or a C2C, you have to understand that very well. That is M number one. M2. M2 is once you know your customer, right? M2 is basically messaging, right? What is your message to your customer? How are you, communicating your USP, your selling proposition, your product offerings, right, to your customer? That's your M2, right? And same products but differently positioned, right? Probably can create wonders, right? In terms of your product, the positioning of the product. If you're able to connect with the need of your customer better, it can define the success or a failure of your product offering or your solution.
mm,
So that's also very critical, and that is something which will also change and evolve, right? Your messagings have to evolve, your prepositions have to evolve as your customers are evolving, your customer needs are changing. So
mm,
that is also something you have to keep a tab on, right? What is your messaging? And as a marketer, one, you have to define what your messaging would be. How would you position your product? How does it compare to the competition? How does it stand in the in the ecosystem, in the marketplace? And also, more importantly, ensure that the messaging is consistent,
mm,
right? Whether your sales guy is going out and talking about your product, it is consistent, or you're using broadcast mediums, mass media or social media or whatever,
mm,
right, to talk about your products. The messaging has to be consistent, right? It has to be clear, consistent. So that's M number two,
mm,
right? And M3 is nothing but medium. So you know who you want to target, you know what you want to say, how do you reach out, right? What are your various avenues? And again, this M3 will vary depending on your business,
mm.
right? Whether it is a B2B or a B2C. So
Correct.
medium will vary, right? So that is basically, this is what marketing is. This is what marketing does, right? And people can basically build expertise across these different M's, right? Somebody can actually build expertise in defining M1, right? Which are most of these market research organizations who study customers, do market research around different segments, target audience. So that is one segment, you can actually build expertise there as well, right?
Right.
M2 is more of ad agency kind of a job where you are defining the organization, the USP, how do you want to make it more creative, connect with your users, what are the needs, all those things. And C, M3 is basically again the I would say media houses, the companies, media buying companies, right, which build expertise in M3, right?
Mm.
Again, agencies, right? So these are different aspects of marketing, and you can build expertise across all three, or you can pick your area where you want to build expertise in, go deep, and pick up that as a career.
On the M3 pieces, where I'm curious about understanding how enterprise level, marketing works, right? Like, because you can pick various channels like the internet or, with marketplaces and stuff like that. where if it's an individual decision to take, or even if it's a small founder decision to take, I'm able to take. But when I'm doing a multi-crore, maybe hundreds of crore worth of deal, with a very complex buying process and a buying committee, how does what mediums do you really leverage to influence that?
So, so for an enterprise sale, right, or an enterprise organization, these buying cycles or sales cycles are pretty long,
Hmm.
right? It requires, a lot of due diligence process, influencing, basically a customer in this situation, because they're getting into a deal which is not about a impulse purchase but a relationship, right? When you're buying or getting into an enterprise deal, it's about 15 years, 30 years, or maybe lifelong. You get locked. It's like a
Right.
marriage,
Right.
right? So the evaluation process is also as similar as you will probably evaluate a life partner for you,
Hmm.
right? And basis that, is about the brand, right? What is the overall values the brand upholds, right? How is it perceived in the marketplace? How do the values match versus your values, right? In terms of compliance, ethics, the overall work ethics, right, from the organization. And then you try and also look at matching the value proposition, what the brand gets or what the company is offering versus what your needs and requirements are.
Hmm.
And there is, how you're growing the brand, how you're creating, brand marketing using social media, using, testimonials play an important role, events, right? These corporate B2B industry events, presence there play an important role, because, again, matchmaking, or I would say the visibility and the initiation of conversations start there to a very large extent for B2B companies, right? Because there are these events where, it's an ideal platform for both suppliers and buyers to come together and understand, what is available in their fields and requirements. So those also play an important role. Search engine marketing, all those PPC and all those things are not very,
Correct.
yeah, it doesn't work
Correct.
to
Makes
that
sense.
extent. It might work again if yours is a slightly mass product. It might still work, right, in a B2B scenarios, because today internet has become, it has replaced newspapers and television, right? Anything you want to know about, you go to the internet,
Correct.
right? So you would want to be there on the internet, right? Even if you're a B2B or a B2C organization, because you want to, but your positioning, maybe, as a B2B, you'll be there trying to educate about you're not trying to generate a lead, but you're trying to create awareness about your product offerings, create education about the product and your offering that you have to your prospect, and maybe try and book a demo or book a, appointment so that you can go and explain the product offering and close the deal. But it's a longer cycle, right?
Right.
It's a very
Correct.
long sales cycle. Testimonials, your market reputation, your brand reputation plays a very critical role.
Correct. Makes sense. You know, generally B2B seems like this very boring thing for young marketers. They're like, "Arey, wo to nahi karna hai." And I, for example, do B2B marketing for my own company. I've seen my peers do very well in B2B as well. So, can you tell us a little bit about how B2B is different from B2C? And what's the case to become a B2B marketer?
Uh, so a person who's done B2C will always find B2B boring, right? So it is not just a perception, I think it's a reality. So B2B is not as dynamic, right, as a B2C marketing. And B2B is more about getting, more bang for the buck, right? It doesn't require to be outlandishly lavish in terms of your spends. You would never have big budgets, right? And it's about a very confined focus market. There are multiple ways: emails, personal touch, these events. Those are the things which work better. In
Hmm.
a B2C, you're talking about, creating big funnels, talking about multi-crore spends on Google, Facebook, Instagram, influencer marketing, all those things. And trends keep changing, right? In a B2C, your product catalogs, your trends, offerings, everything keeps changing, right? So there's always a refresh,
Hmm.
always new, right? Something new to talk about, something new to explore, something new to do. And
Hmm.
most of these mediums, right, when we talk about these mediums, right, the M3s, the way they evolve, they are very aligned for a B2C outreach,
Yeah.
right? The new mediums are more B2C outreach mediums,
Correct.
right? So the exposures there, the kind of learning that you'll get there, and the kind of, the numbers and the volumes when you do your campaigns and you start looking, building those pivots on Excel sheets and trying to crunch numbers, see your CPAs, CPCs, and CPMs and ECPMs. If you get high there, वो
Hmm.
फिर B2B तो boring लगेगा आपको. B2B you get into single digits or two digits, right? When you're talking about leads and numbers and market
Correct.
sizing and all those things. But it requires different mindsets, right? B2B needs more nurturing of relationships, more account based marketing,
Hmm.
more going deeper with one customer, trying to understand the evolving needs, making us stronger, forging stronger connects.
Hmm.
B2C में वो नहीं है. B2C is more about, you know going mass, right?
Correct. Correct.
Going across the country, everybody is your customer potentially, right? And
Yeah.
trying to look at those mediums. Yeah, so yeah.
Makes
तो
sense.
वो
Yeah, I
difference
feel.
है.
Yeah, I think, yeah, like you said, I feel the scale of the number of people is lesser, but the scale of revenues is far larger, and that's why I think that
And your scope is
nurturing.
also large, right? With a customer, your scope is pretty large, right? There are so many things you can do, right? To
Correct.
build the relationship, to evolve the relationship.
Correct.
As I mentioned, it's a marriage, right? It's
Right.
a 15, 20, 30, 40 year kind of a relationship you're getting in,
Correct.
right? So
Correct.
understanding the evolving needs as they're using products, how they can grow on your product, on your offering, right? The relationship has to keep getting stronger and stronger, right? As they are working on your products, how can they become your spokespersons or brand ambassadors, right?
Correct.
Because that becomes one of the most important avenues to get new customer referrals work very well, right? In a B2B.
Right.
B2C also referrals work, but B2B, it plays a very important role.
100%. Um, Jumping now into AI, right? I would love to kind of ask you, for a company which is been around for so long, right? When you are a marketing leader in that company, how do you convince the entire company to leverage AI? Because whenever something is new, it's risky, and there are less use cases for it. People today, have often told me that they're really wanting their company to adopt AI or try something new, do vibe coding, whatever it is called. um, they've not been able to get buy-in from their leadership or management. You're of course part of the leadership and the management, so I would love to kind of understand, how do you approach leveraging a new technology like AI in a traditional legacy company?
So, technology is one of the driving forces behind our organization, right? So we are an RTA, we provide platform for the mutual fund
Correct.
ecosystem, to thrive on, and we have multiple different kind of users who will log into our platform and use our platform for executing transactions, whether these are distributors or these are end customers like you, investors like you and me, and even the AMCs, right, who are configuring and creating their offers and their NFOs on our platform, right? So technology plays a very critical role,
Hmm.
and AI, as an initiative, is one area where our company has been investing a lot, right? So if I talk about my function, and I have no shame in claiming that, in terms of the new age marketers which we hire, right? People, the millennials, they are so conversant creating new agents, creating prompts on chat GPT and copilot and whatnot, that they're very fluent today, right? I am surprised, right, when I sit with them, understand, they actually teach me how we can use agents and create prompts,
Right.
right, on some of these AI tools to create some content or create um, some stories, user stories, and all those things,
Right.
which work really well. So we use AI in marketing. To, as I mentioned, technology, is one area where we use AI.
Mhm.
For sure, because all the operational work, we have a lot of AI tools that we've built, and under process there are a lot of there's a new initiative called CAMS AI, which we've just announced, which is more about reinventing our tech stack, tech
Fun.
platform. which is underway, and we're launching a lot of products, right? Whether it is in RegTech or whether it is something which will help us ease the operations, where human in the loop. So, our tech teams, basically, that's how they call it. It's a human
Right.
in the loop kind of arrangement which they're working on, which will help, reduce errors, improve efficiency, reduce reliance on manual work. A lot of these manual repetitive works, whether it is in our front offices where we are accepting physical forms, or even at our back offices where we are doing data entries. A lot of these will get replaced using technology and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and there are tools underway. I'm not able to, I can't disclose some of them
Sure.
because we're still working on them, and we'll be announcing them over the next few months for the industry. And similarly, as I mentioned, in marketing as well, we use AIs to for content, user stories,
Mm,
even for some amount of analytics, understanding certain
mm.
markets, those areas.
I think there's so much redundant work a creative person does today. I think that is what's going to go away, which will in fact open their, bandwidth to think of the, more strategic and more creative work, as you said. So I think that's definitely where, relevance lies for agency founders. I want to now just jump into the last question. We're at the end of the pod. Thank you so much for, all your time. I know you've gone and shared a lot of thoughts, but as a parting thought, I would love for you to answer this. If I'm a young marketer and I want to become a CMO one day, a marketing leader one day, in the next 12 months, what are the things I should be doing to ensure that I have a good career progression?
So 12 months will not take you anywhere, right? One, you need to play a long innings, right? You have to be prepared for that. And I think more importantly, it's all about constant learning, right? The day you stop learning, you will start stagnating because there will be someone else who will come over and take your job. So if you look at my career progression and my career changes, I've actually, as I mentioned, I've switched industries, right? From B to C, I've even, I've moved to B2B,
Hmm.
and last two assignments have been a B2B assignment, right? And it's all about moving out of your comfort zone and trying to be out of your comfort zone for as much as possible, right? These 12 months, if you can stay the entire 12 months out of your comfort zone, trying to do things which you probably will make you feel uncomfortable, is something which will give you the highest learning, a steepest
Right.
learning curve for you, right? So I think that's very important. You have to always make sure that you're learning in your life, right? And learning is equal to growth, right? Money in bank is, your salary rise is not equal to growth, because salary rise, I've seen so many instances around me, so many cases, probably I'm sure you would be aware of, where people have seen astronomical rise in their salaries when they join some startups. But after a point of time, they get redundant, right?
Hmm.
Because they're not able to acquire new skills, they're not able to learn, they're not
True.
able to grow, and they basically outcost themselves in the market, and they're not able to find new jobs, right?
Correct.
And it is happening all around us. So it is very important that execution and learning, these
Yeah.
are the only two things which will just take you places. Keep on executing, because that will lead you to learn. And do not let your learning curve go flat. Go into a new area, right? If you don't want to switch jobs, want to stay with the same company, at least try and switch functions,
Right.
right? So basically, even in my first job with Bazi, I stayed for 6 years. I was doing sales for the first 4 years, and then I requested to get switched to marketing, because
Hmm.
I thought, I've done what I wanted to do in sales. So I requested to switch to marketing. Then I switched to marketing for 2 years after eBay took over. So I did marketing with eBay, and
Awesome.
then I've been doing marketing through and through,
Right.
right? So I think that is very important, right? So that is what my recommendation or suggestion would be, that keep learning, and execution is the key.
Awesome. Yeah, I think keep learning, keep executing is just some fantastic advice to end the conversation on. Thank you so much for your time, Rahul. I hope you had fun.
Yeah, it was got me back into my nostalgic times in my college days. I never thought you'll ask me my college question, but yeah, it was fun talking to you.
Awesome, awesome. And for everybody who's tuned along, thank you so much. If you'd like to hear another marketing leader, please like, share, and subscribe, and a new episode will come out very soon.